Now that we've seen our three major types of chemical bonds, covalent bonds, ionic bonds, and hydrogen bonds, and our two forms of covalent bonds, the pure or non-polar covalent bonds and the polar covalent bonds, let's look at how these chemical bonds are put together and how they're broken in a group known as the chemical reactions. So chemical reactions are when you form chemical bonds, rearrange them, or break them. And remember, this always involves the electrons. Chemical bonds are the association between two atoms, but it always involves electrons in some way. So we represent our molecules using our chemical formulas. So our molecular formula might be H2O, so that indicates one water molecule. A chemical equation will include our reactants becoming our products, and then we have a list of how many atoms are involved. So whenever you see a number indicated by a subscript, that's atoms joined together by bonds. So it's H subscript 2O means that there are two hydrogens attached to that oxygen. We're also going to see a number used as a prefix before a molecule that indicates how many unjoined atoms or how many unjoined molecules there are. We're going to look at an example of that in a moment. So this chemical equation will include the reactants, the number of reactants, the kind of reactants, yielding, so there's usually going to be an arrow, becoming the products, the number and kinds of the resulting substances, and the proportions of each will form a balanced chemical equation. So let's have a look at this. Some easy examples are two hydrogens unjoined at this point, H plus H, yielding H subscript 2. So the subscript means that that is going to be in the same molecule, hydrogen gas. Or four hydrogens, so now you see that 4 is not a subscript, so that means 4 unjoined hydrogens added to a carbon forming CH subscript 4, or methane. So CH4 is a molecular formula. Or here's another one where we have our balanced chemical equation, C6H12O6. Does anybody remember what that is? Yeah, that could be glucose. Plus 6 oxygen molecules. So O subscript 2 means those two oxygens are chemically bonded together. The 6, you notice, isn't a subscript, so that means you have 6 unjoined oxygens. Yields or becomes 6 unjoined carbon dioxide molecules plus 6 unjoined water molecules. So we have reactants becoming our products. We're going to look at some major groups of chemical reactions. Synthesis reactions, where we bring things together, decomposition reactions, where we break them apart, and some exchange reactions, where we exchange one part for another. So a simple synthesis reaction, A plus B becomes AB, bonded together. So atoms or molecules combining together, forming these larger, more complex molecules. So you always are forming a chemical bond. This is also known as an anabolic reaction. We've already used that term. It means to build bigger. Here's an example of a synthesis reaction. So we have individual little amino acids, the building blocks of the proteins, the monomers of proteins, put together to form a larger, more complex protein. Synthesis, anabolic. Then we have our decomposition reaction. So we have our larger molecule, AB, yields or becomes A on its own plus B on its own. So a molecule is broken down into smaller parts, or maybe all the way down into the individual atoms. This is exactly the reverse of a synthesis reaction, so it always involves breaking those bonds. We say that it is catabolic. Cats shred things apart. Catabolic reactions. So if we had a large complex polysaccharide like glycogen, Glycogen is stored in your liver or sometimes in your skeletal muscle, and it can be broken apart into individual glucose molecules. That's a great example of a decomposition reaction, a catabolic reaction. Then exchange reaction. So we're just exchanging one part for another. Now, if we think of this, we're going to make some chemical bonds and we're going to break some chemical bonds. So AB, the B, is going to be exchanged for the C. So we have to break the bond between A and B and then form the bond between A and C, an exchange reaction. So here's an example of an exchange reaction. We have ATP. ATP we usually think of as the energy currency of the cell, and it's going to donate one of its phosphates to a glucose. So we break the bond between that final phosphate in ATP. We end up with an ADP, and the phosphate you see is now attached to the glucose as glucose phosphate. Then there's another major group. These are energy associated reactions. We call them oxidation reduction reactions or sometimes redox reactions. They are decomposition reactions. So for example, breaking food fuels down for energy would be a part of a redox reaction. They also are exchange. But in a redox reaction, the thing being exchanged are the electrons. Electrons will be either lost or gained. So if you lose an electron, we say that that molecule is oxidized. If a molecule gains an electron, we say that it is reduced. Now I have an easy way, I remember those. There may be other ways, but I always use the little term Leo says Ger. Has anyone else ever heard of Leo says Ger or something very similar to that? So Leo, L-E-O, says Ger. What does that mean? Leo, lose electrons, oxidize. Says Ger, gain electrons, reduced. Right? It's just the easy way I remember that. All right, so we have 6 glucose molecules plus 6 we have 1 glucose molecule plus 6 oxygen molecules yields 6 carbon dioxides plus 6 waters plus ATP. All right. So that's a good example of where this molecule is going to be completely rearranged. But as we do that, we're going to switch around some electrons as well. Glucose is going to be oxidized, so it's going to lose electrons, and oxygen eventually will be reduced. It's going to gain electrons. So the glucose gets converted into the carbon dioxide, and the oxygen gets converted into the water. And as a result, we also get lots of energy. So whenever you see a redox reaction, energy is changing hands. In fact, in many chemical reactions, we see a general flow of energy. So all chemical reactions are either exergonic or endergonic. In an exergonic chemical reaction, you have a net release of energy. Now, some of you have taken chemistry, may have seen a description very similar to this. Exergonic may sound a lot like exothermic. And often these are exactly alike. Exergonic reactions release some energy. Often that energy is released as heat energy. But some of the energy may have been released as energy to do some cellular work. So instead of simply calling it exothermic, we call it exergonic because some of the energy could have gone into producing cellular work. In an exergonic reaction, the products have less potential energy than the reactants. So potential energy is the energy due to position. It could be the position of the chemical bonds. So the products that were formed are simpler. They have less potential energy than the energy of the reactants. So catabolic reactions, oxidative reactions, are exergonic. Catabolic, we take large complex structures and break them into smaller, less complex, less energetic molecules. Oxidation, it's lost electrons. The energy goes with the electrons. Endergonic reactions require an input of energy, and probably some of you guys may have heard of endothermic. So usually these are going to gain heat energy from the environment, but it could be other types of energy. It could be ATP energy it gains from the environment. In an endergonic reaction, we build more complex molecules, so the products have more potential energy than reactants. They're anabolic reactions. We're building bigger things. Now, many chemical reactions are theoretically reversible. So the forward reaction would be A plus B yields AB. The reverse would be AB yields A plus B. Often we will write this as A plus B could become AB, but it also could go back and form A plus B. So this would be a reversible chemical reaction. If the rate of the reaction in the forward direction is equal to the rate in the reverse reaction, we say that the reactions are in equilibrium. But you can disturb this equilibrium, right? So you could change the concentration of the particles. You could change the temperature, right? So many are theoretically reversible, but in reality, many biological reactions are irreversible because maybe the reverse reaction just takes too much energy, or we may need AB for something else. So it gets removed from the reaction and it's not available to break back apart. So the rate of these reactions are affected by temperature. If you increase the temperature, you're increasing heat energy. That can increase the rate of the reaction. The concentration of the reactants. How many reactants do you have available to become product? Decrease the particle size. Smaller particles move around faster. They bump into each other more. So that increases the rate of the chemical reaction. Or you could add in a catalyst. A catalyst is anything that increases the rate of a chemical reaction without being changed. Later on, we're going to look at a good example of these enzymes that are biological catalysts. They're made out of proteins. So, biochemistry, study of all of this chemistry stuff, chemical composition, reactions in living matter. Now, these chemicals could be either organic or inorganic. So we're going to start off with some of the inorganic and move our way into the organic. And we're going to concentrate initially on water. So our inorganic compounds include water. You are mainly an inorganic creature. You're mainly made out of water. Salts, acids, bases. They either do not contain carbon or sometimes it's a simple form of carbon. For example, an inorganic compound will include carbon dioxide, right? That's inorganic. Organic compounds are carbohydrates, are lipids or fats, proteins and nucleic acids. They contain carbon, usually are really large, and they're covalently bonded together. But we need both of these for life. So let's start off by looking at water. We've already looked at water a little bit. Water is a very important, large part of living cells. In all living cells, maybe 60 to 80% of the volume of living cells made out of water. It is very important because it has a lot of really unique chemical properties. So we're going to go through some of these. It has a high heat capacity. Whew, that's a weird term. That just means that it has the ability to absorb heat and release heat with very little temperature change. So if you walk out on a very sunny day, there's a lot of energy coming from solar radiation, but when it hits you, you can absorb a lot of that energy without changing your body temperature, right? Likewise, when it's very cold outside, you can radiate out some heat without, again, changing your body temperature very much. And that also means in places like, we live on the Gulf of Mexico, so during the day when the solar energy is hitting the earth, the temperature doesn't get that hot. It may seem like it, but it doesn't get that hot. And at night, it doesn't cool down that quickly either. We also have a high heat of vaporization, right? So when water evaporates, when it changes from the liquid phase to the gas phase, it takes with it a lot of energy. You're having to break hydrogen bonds between the water molecules. And so that takes a lot of energy to do, so it removes a lot of energy from your body when that happens. And when you sweat, it's really easy to cool yourself down as the sweat evaporates. Now, on a humid day here in Florida, evaporation of sweat may not happen. Polar solvent properties. Polar is, well, we often say it's the universal solvent. It's not quite universal. Oils, lipids don't dissolve very well in water, but many things will, especially things that are ionic. In fact, it will dissolve those ionic bonded molecules and break them apart into the individual ions. So when you put sodium chloride, table salt, into water, it breaks apart into sodium ions and chloride ions. And it will completely surround those charged molecules. It forms a little layer of water around charged molecules. And because it dissolves so many things that are important for life, it allows you to transport things around in the body. In fact, plasma is mainly water. Plasma is the liquid found in your blood. It's the blood without the cells. Right, and it is mainly water, like 98.5% water. So if you put a crystal of salt in some water, the water is very quickly going to begin to interact with the sodium and the chloride. You'll notice that it forms a little circle around the sodium, separating it out, and then a little circle around the chloride. So around the positively charged sodium, you see that the negatively charged, the partial negatively charged oxygens are attracted to that. But if you look at the chloride, then the partially positive hydrogens, and this delta, it should be delta positive, that means a partial positive charge, they're attracted to the negatively charged chlorides. It surrounds them, it forms what we call a hydration sphere, and separates them out. So this is how you dissociate an ionically bonded compound in water. So water is also very reactive. Later on, when we get into the large organic molecules, we'll talk about types of chemical reactions called hydrolysis reactions, breaking something down, a decomposition reaction using water, and dehydration syntheses, putting things together using water as well. It's also very cushioning, right? Water, because of the hydrogen bonds, will maintain a set distance between the molecules. And so you can try and compress those water molecules. It won't compress too much, though. Sort of like if you've ever jumped up and down on a water bed. You know that it will cushion your blow quite a bit. So it prevents certain organs from physical trauma. Like around your brain and around your spinal cord with something called cerebral spinal fluid. It helps cushion your brain and your spinal cord from mechanical shock. All right, so next we're going to get into another really important inorganic molecule, types of inorganic molecules known as the salts, but that's going to be a topic for another video.